Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Courage Conversation Show. I'm your host, Ashley Easter. I am the founder and executive director of Courage 365, and we have a great show planned for you tonight. We're going to be talking to Chrissy Stroop, and she is such an amazing person. The Exvangelical movement, if you have heard about that hashtag on Twitter, she was very much at the forefront of bringing that to the surface, and just so many things I have learned from Chrissy over the last couple of years. She was actually one of our workshop speakers at the Courage Conference a couple of years ago. I got so many great reviews from her talk and super excited to bring her on the show tonight. So before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and read her bio for you, and then we're going to welcome her onto the screen. All right, so a co-editor with Lauren O'Neill of Empty the Pews, Stories of Leaving the Church, Chrissy Stroop is an exvangelical writer who grew up in an evangelical community, attending Christian school in Indianapolis, Indiana, and Colorado Springs, Colorado. Y'all love me with my dyslexic bloopers, so just hang on. In 2012, she earned her PhD in modern Russian history from Stanford University, after which she taught at the college level in Moscow, Russia, and Tampa, Florida. In 2018, she became a full-time self-employed writer, and in 2019, she came out as transgender and moved to Portland, Oregon, where she currently resides. Stroop, whose work has appeared in the Boston Globe, Foreign Policy, Playboy, and other outlets, writes most regularly for Religion, Dispatches, and Open Democracy. So Chrissy Stroop has such an amazing pedigree of work, prolific writer, just so good. And we're going to be talking today about leaving evangelicalism and some of the exvangelical community. And so I know many of the survivors here have experienced abuse in evangelical environments. Some have decided to stay. Most of us have decided to leave, and our faith has shifted and evolved in different ways. But regardless of where you stand, I think it's very important to hear this perspective and this story. So we'll be right back after these messages with Chrissy Stroop.
Anxiousness can strike at any time, while driving a car, in the middle of the night, when giving a work presentation, or in a crowded place. Introducing CalmiGo, a smart calming device that learns your personal breathing patterns and adapts to you for immediate relief in just 3 minutes. It quiets your senses through breathing regulation, multisensory stimulation, and calming scents. Don't stress another moment. Click the Learn More button and start using CalmiGo today.
Talk about it. I was told not to talk about it.
So I'm here to talk about it.
Because I can't stay quiet.
I was able to break my silence.
Because of those who refuse to stay quiet.
I am a businesswoman.
Activist.
Survivor.
Survivor. Survivor.
Waking up every day in fear, living in a constant cycle of self-doubt and anxiety. We at Courage 365 know that this is what it's like for many survivors of abuse. The abuse may be over, but the healing journey has just begun. After getting professional support, the next most important step is finding a supportive community. And that's why we've created Courage Clubs. Courage Clubs are free online peer support groups created by survivors for survivors. Courage Clubs are for adults who have survived abuse and wish to build supportive community with other survivors. Each month, we discuss a new topic with helpful tools and resources for your healing journey. We can't promise your healing journey will be easy, but we can promise you don't have to do it alone. Hey, Chrissy, welcome to the Courage Conversation Show.
Hi, Ashley. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And hey, your friendship has been such a beautiful thing to me over the last couple of years. I'm continually learning from you. Even before this call, I learned some new things from you, and I just feel like you are just a fantastic teacher, not only to me, but just to a large community through your writing and through your social media activism. So thank you for being that person in my life.
That is so kind of you, Ashley. I really appreciate being friends with you as well. You're such a generous and caring person, and it really comes through in your important work. I admire you greatly.
Well, two souls here together on the show. I'm just excited. All right. So, Chrissy, you grew up in an evangelical background, as did many of our survivors. I teased that at the beginning of the show. And I was wondering, what was it like for you when you decided to leave the evangelical community? And, maybe how did some people respond when you decided that this thing that you'd done for your whole childhood was not working anymore and you needed to take a new path?
It was a complicated, long-term, and painful process for me, because there were a lot of things that I knew weren't working for me at a certain point. I also just kind of never felt quite right with gender roles and never felt quite comfortable in my own skin, but it actually took me into my 30s, and I was definitely outside of evangelicalism by then to really be able to put my finger on what was going on there. But my boy socialization just never worked right. But I did not also, I didn't know at 5 years old that I wanted to be a girl. I didn't know you could do that. I just had no idea,
I
right?
didn't know that at 5 either.
So I don't have that kind of like typical transgender story. I have more the kind of story of uh, they wanted me to do certain things. Most of them didn't make sense to me. And I became this very cerebral kid who read a lot of books. And, when the men were watching golf in the living room and the women in the family were cooking or whatever, a lot of times I would just go off by myself and read. Um, so, because, yeah, I definitely wasn't going to watch golf, and nobody was really teaching me how to do the cooking thing, which I love doing now, by the way. But not that women have to cook, but but anyway. But it's
It's
just
good
like that
women don't
gendered
have to
social.
cook because I suck at cooking.
It's just that gendered socialization,
Yes.
those expectations, right?
Yes.
And I didn't really feel like I fit into what I was supposed to be, and I didn't realize I could even try to be the other one. Even though looking back, I can see that I definitely identified more with like strong female characters in literature and film and so forth. But anyway, so all that was going on. Um, but with the doubts and everything, um, I remember feeling really weird about how evangelicalism manipulates people and the purity culture stuff around seventh grade. And I couldn't have told you then that I was starting anything like deconstruction, just or that I even didn't agree with the theology. But when they took us on this like retreat day to basically be fear mongered and shamed at all day, that felt weird, right? So we had this day of sort of purity culture that I didn't know was going to culminate with us all being asked to like sign purity pledges. This was at Colorado Springs Christian School, and yeah, and they were using this kind of rhetoric like, you should never do anything with a boyfriend or girlfriend that you wouldn't do with somebody else's husband or wife, because then you're cheating on your future spouse and their future spouse. And then and all kinds of like misinformation, disinformation. Um, condoms can't stop the AIDS virus. Condoms fail all the time. Blah blah blah. Whatever. Shame, shame, guilt, guilt. Condoms break. This kind of stuff over and over. And then they get to this part where, like, now, we'd like you to come down and take these purity pledges and go off and sit by yourself and prayerfully consider whether you can sign this pledge. And don't sign it unless you really mean it. But of course, we didn't know if we would be like expelled if we didn't sign it. So obviously, everyone's going to sign the purity pledge.
Like,
and so I agreed.
Yeah.
I
Even
agreed
just
at the time that
contracts
like
in general, you usually have a couple days to think about them, but this is like on the spot.
right, and I totally agreed. Okay, it's a sin to have sex outside of marriage, and God wants marriage to be between one man and one woman, and that's the only context for sex. I would, no question, I would have said, yeah, that's God's best. But I still felt manipulated. I think it was like sort of a seed of deconstruction there, because I really didn't like the way they went about it, but I couldn't articulate a lot of my feelings about why at that point. But then in high school, my family moved back to the Indianapolis area. This was after the pastor at the church plant that we were a part of in Colorado Springs kind of really went on a power trip and was being very arbitrary and domineering, and threatened the job security of my dad, the music pastor, and also of the youth pastor, who was also from Indiana. So my dad, and probably the youth pastor too, wrote a strongly worded letter to the missionary church denomination, which was the denomination that we were part of at the time. Strongly worded, but also very vague, right? Like to this day, I can't tell you many examples of what Pastor Ron Clarkson actually did because of what I call evangelical vagueness about these
Yes.
about these sin things. You know?
Yes.
It's so annoying. But so there was this turmoil, and anyway, then we started this church plant in Indianapolis area, north suburb of Indianapolis, called Fishers, and it failed within a few years. It just didn't become self-sustaining in terms of the funding. Then the treasurer at that church, or whatever position she was in, but she was in charge of like the money, you know, she blamed my dad for not paying the full tithe of his salary. And you know, parents in ministries, salaries are not that great, so he didn't feel like he could actually afford to give 10% of it back to the church. And then we stopped being friends with the youth pastor had become the senior pastor, and we stopped being friends with his family. And so I think all of this stuff too, I'm watching this and kind of thinking, this seems uncomfortable and, you know, and all too common. At this point, you know, I can say, okay, this is a pattern. Both my parents work in ministry. My mom's a Christian school teacher. You kind of see how the sausage is made. So yeah, but then I finally read the Bible through for the entire, like, from, you know, cover to cover when I was about 16 years old. I might have started when I was 15. I finished it when I was 16. And then I had noticed a lot of things that seemed contradictory, or things that just really disturbed me, like divinely ordained genocide and that sort of thing. And of course, we had to believe this was all literally true, and you couldn't reinterpret anything. So, you know, I went and talked to our pastor at our new church, which was a non-denominational sort of megachurch inspired smaller church, about this sort of thing. He was also a Bible teacher at our school at that time, but the school was a large interdenominational one, not a church school. And he gave me a book of apologetics to read. He seemed really sympathetic at first, you know, that I was struggling with these intellectual doubts. We all thought he was very intellectual because he has a doctorate from like a Bible college kind of seminary, and, you know, and would like quote Dostoevsky sometimes and stuff. So everyone in our community is like, oh, he's such an intellectual. So he gives me this book of apologetics to read. I don't remember which one it was, because it definitely wasn't Lee Strobel or Josh McDowell or anybody really famous. But it was in question and answer format, and I just remember reading it and finding the answers just a little too glib and pat and not really fully adding up for me. So I went back and returned the book and told him that I was still struggling with doubt. And then he turns on the manipulation, and then he really makes me the problem. So looking back, I see this as a pretty major incident of spiritual abuse, but a spiritual abuse that's just like endemic to evangelicalism, to these kinds of fundamentalist beliefs. It's impossible for this kind of spiritual abuse not to exist in that subculture, in my view, which is part of why I ultimately left it. But again, it was a long process. So he then told me, oh, well, if you're still having doubts, you know, it must be you're harboring sin in your life, because otherwise the Holy Spirit would let you see that the scripture is inerrant. And, you know, now I look at this as very authoritarian and Orwellian, but this whole doctrine of inerrancy just makes no sense, you know, and to try to like force people to believe it. It's basically like trying to force, you know, people in 1984 to believe that 2 + 2 = 5, right? So at that point, I'm on a journey of what I would now call deconstruction. Did not know that term at the time, but I still have a couple of years before I graduate from high school. Most of my college years are spent in this kind of like existential crisis of trying to process this stuff. As a result, I don't have many friends from college. A lot of people look back at college who are privileged to go to college and have some of their best friends for life from back then, and I don't really. There's a couple of people I'm still in contact with sometimes, and really only one person that I think of as a friend, and she's actually a conservative Christian, more reasonable than most, and somehow we still manage to be to be friends, though it's a little bit weird, but because mostly I cannot make friends across those lines anymore, and I don't try to. But she's really funny and creative. um, and yeah, more. She's definitely more reasonable on certain things, like seeing um, racism in America and that sort of stuff. But so anyway, by the time I returned from studying abroad in Germany and England, my third year of college, I knew I couldn't call myself evangelical anymore. I kind of like stepped back enough, processed enough that I knew this. And so I started to try to feel out a couple of friends. So you asked how did people react, and they didn't react well, right? So basically, when I told this one girl that was a friend of mine, about the same age, she was in my graduating class of high school, class of 1999. She just felt just everything. There was just a chill that fell over the conversation, and I didn't even say I wasn't a Christian, but I said I just can't be an evangelical anymore, and I can't really believe things like inerrancy of the Bible. I don't remember exactly what I told her. I just remember that we weren't really friends after that anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And that was still kind of early days. So I didn't. Then I'm about 21, and I didn't talk about it much. I turned 22 that summer, and I kind of sat on it for more years, feeling things out a little bit, especially with my dad, who is much less threatened by difference than like most of the other evangelicals in my life. So I could have these conversations with him. And weirdly, he, through a very sort of strange series of events where basically he got screwed over by the pastor and the elders of the last evangelical church where he was a music pastor. This was in the independent Christian church, which he had also worked in some of those before. Before we were in the missionary church, we were in the Christian church, that branch of the Restoration movement that's like slightly less batty than the Church of Christ, which of course also comes in different flavors, but still very conservative evangelical, these Christian churches. So he kind of got forced out of a job through ageism, and I think also being too liberal because he liked Richard Rohr and Rob Bell. So an old friend of his who used to be a professional recruiter helped him get his resume together and everything and make contacts. And he ended up in an LGBTQ affirming mainline church, the ELCA denomination, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, which was the good Lutherans. So that's actually nice. And now he's LGBTQ affirming. Don't think that my mom is there. If she is there, she can't say it out loud or she would get fired from her Christian school job, although she's retiring now, so we'll see, but I bet she's still, but she tries to be like, well, Jesus just said love everybody and just kind of leave it at that at this point, which is still progress, right? They got their COVID vaccines, so right. Unlike anyone else in my family, basically, well, I think one uncle and aunt did, but so yeah, at a certain point, I really thought to myself, I don't know if I'm kind of quasi-dissimulating while being more open about my political opinions, but not my religious opinions, but only in fits and starts, and sometimes taking stuff back because mom gets upset and I cry. I didn't know if I was doing this to protect myself or to protect my family anymore. But this kind of socialization makes you feel like a traitor to your family because this kind of socialization is, in my view, inherently abusive, right? It doesn't let you blossom and become yourself. You have to be this very specific thing, and if you can't be it, then there's just no place for you, and everyone would be angry with you. And so the more that I sort of came out about this and talked about this stuff, and even before coming out as queer, it did not go well, but because at the end of the day, my parents did actually love me no matter what, and I never believed them when they told me that growing up, because everything else they did told me I couldn't believe it. So I didn't think that family would trump ideology for them, and maybe that's partly just my high scrupulous personality. But one time I must have been back from college over summer or something, and we watched Fiddler on the Roof, the old movie version. And at the end, I asked them as actually a sincere question, would you disown me if I married a Jew? And they were so angry with me, like, of course not. No, what are you talking about? Well, don't be unequally yoked. You taught me this my whole life. So wouldn't you just be like Tevye, but from the other side? Why wouldn't I think that? They were super angry that I would think that, but why wouldn't I? I had every reason to think it.
Wow. Wow. Well, I think your journey is so interesting, but I think a lot of people can really identify with what you're saying because everybody's family is a little bit different, everybody's church is a little bit different, but these themes of strict ideology, having to fit in these boxes, asking questions gets you really ostracized, and then having a lot of fear around how family and friends will treat you if you talk about who you really are and about what your beliefs are. And I think whether people leave evangelicalism because of ideological shifts, or whether it's because of certain abuses they've experienced, or whether it's a mix of both, or something else completely, I think it can be really difficult and a lot of feelings of uncertainty because I'm really happy that your family decided to stay in relationship with you, decided to continue loving you. But that's a realistic fear that you had that maybe they wouldn't because of some of the strict ideology. And then there's so many stories of survivors of evangelicals who have left and their families do shun them. And it's a big choice deciding to talk about, again, who you really are and whether that is a sex or gender identity that people didn't expect, or whether it is even, I know for myself, kind of like what you talked about, these strict gender roles of, women are supposed to cook. I was not a good cook. And, it's kind of like embarrassing to be like, oh, I can't do this thing. And like to just be who you are, no matter what that looks like, that can be terrifying because there's so much assimilation expected in the church. And so I've got a couple of other questions here, but this is all just really fascinating. And I appreciate you being vulnerable to share this because it is a painful journey. It is hard. There are a lot of uncertainties, but I do think a lot of people watching are going to resonate and feel less alone after hearing this. So thank you for that. What would you say are maybe some of your tips for people who are maybe on the cusp of leaving organized religion or leaving evangelicalism? I know our survivor community is across the spectrum with where they're at and what they believe. And I think most of us are continuing to grow and stretch. And even if somebody's not at one place today, maybe in 6 months they will be, and they'll look back at this information. But what tips would you say that you wish you had known or you like to give people now when they're thinking of leaving evangelicalism or conservative Christianity?
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. That's a great question. I mean, it is such a painful thing, and you don't know how it's going to go when you start just having to be honest with people. And I think in evangelical subculture and also just white American subculture, we are really socialized to avoid conflict in most situations. It's extremely threatening to disagree with people. We're taught to fear difference.
Yes.
And I think women in particular pick up on that. Men can be more confrontational in certain situations. I mean, I guess any evangelical can in certain situations, but within the family, you are not supposed to be confrontational. So you don't want to rock the boat. And I guess the first thing I would say is people should know that their safety is paramount, and so if you need to establish some physical distance or some economic independence or something before you tell people in your family what you really think, I mean, that's okay. Don't need to feel like to be authentic you have to tell them everything right away. If not, if doing that is going to compromise your safety.
Mm.
But I think more fundamentally, um, letting go of this need to be right about everything, letting go of this
Mm.
need for certainty, is a good thing. Learning that sometimes it's okay to disagree, and to clarify your values, and maybe where there are the things where you really want to be um, you know pretty adamant about that, or lines that you don't want to cross, and be sort of deal breakers for whether you could be close to someone or have someone in your life. But other things that just really don't matter that much. One thing that I have tried to stress a lot in working to cultivate community for ex-evangelicals and people who are questioning, leaving their faith, trying to find out who they are, is not to be prescriptive about other people's journeys. Because at the end of the day, I think what brings us together and why a lot of people end up leaving, it's really about values much more than it is about belief. It's about valuing individual moral autonomy, um, the right to be different and be who you are, not forced to repress that and forced to conform. Um, it's about authenticity and truth, and breaking free of all these kinds of authoritarian rules and of all this baggage of white supremacist patriarchy. That, sure, we were the not racist Christians growing up. That's what we always told ourselves anyway, right? But everything we're doing is reinforcing white supremacist patriarchy in the United States, and the white supremacist part is an important part of that. Let go of this desire for everyone to be the same. As long as you can really have mutual respect, and get that reciprocated from someone. I mean, I don't really care. I'm an atheist at this point because it makes more sense to me. I'm not an atheist who claims to know, though, right? So nobody knows what happens after we die. Some days I like to think, well, maybe there could be some kind of afterlife, and maybe that would be nice. And um, but I don't see any compelling reason to believe in a micromanaging God or anything like that. So I just don't. And to me, life without theology is much easier, because for someone like me, it seems like theology just creates more problems than it solves. But for other people who want to reclaim it, that is a valid path.
Mm. Wow. Those tips are really great. And I also appreciate how you're very clear on where you are at in your journey. And also, you respect other people's journey. And I think what I have seen a lot of times in the space of people leaving, whether it's a cult or whether it is a mainstream evangelical church or whether it is a religion as a whole, a lot of times people turn kind of that fundamentalism that they learned in those environments, and they just kind of replace that with new things that they're fundamentalist about. And
Mm-hmm,
I have
mm-hmm.
noticed with you, you have some hard lines about things that you feel are moral or not moral. I have hard lines about abuse and, things like that. But I love how you have come to a place where you just accept that other people are at different places, that we as a society, like morality, our actions, like how we treat each other is so important. And you don't have to tell people that they're wrong constantly. And I think that's a huge piece of growth that a lot of us don't ever get to. We want to, if we've found what we feel like is a new truth or a new understanding, we want every single person to come to that same conclusion. And,
Right. Do you have a moment to
unless
speak about our Lord and Savior, Charles Darwin?
exactly, yes, yes. But I think that's beautiful, and I know that's not just something that you talk about, because you and I have some different beliefs on different things, and yet you've been an amazing friend, and you have supported me. You've given me some opportunities to support you, and I really value that. And I think that is a huge point of growth that we should all be working towards, is being able to appreciate other people, even if they're not exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
That's just
I think
really good.
when I was a kid, I had this thought that there's probably something you can learn from everyone. And, now looking back at that, it maybe seems a little bit naive. I still think it's probably true on some level, but
Yeah.
obviously there are some people that I still just don't want to invite into
Yeah.
my life. There are hard lines
Learn,
around
but I don't want to learn
you
from
know,
that person.
abuse and things
Yes.
like that. But
Mm.
when there is mutual respect and reciprocity and sort of a version of the golden rule, which is not do unto others as you would have them do unto you from your perspective, but is try to understand their perspective
Yes.
and do what maybe they would prefer for you to do in a situation. And you don't have to be right all the time, and you don't have to fight about everything all the time. You choose your battles, and you choose what you value more. It has just kind of coming to try to do that, to this place where we can just hold space for
Yeah.
differences, has made my life a lot better. So I don't claim to be so supremely mature or anything, but this is something that I think is worth arguing about. And I carry the same message of embracing pluralism into progressive religious spaces like the like Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, or I've worked with social justice oriented pastors like my friend Reverend Dr. Andre Johnson um, in Memphis, Tennessee, or the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice and Reverend Dr. Carrie Jackson, who works at that organization. But I also take the same message into atheist spaces, movement secularism spaces that um, have up to the present sort of mostly also been these very white male dominated spaces where being right and having debates are like such important things. And then guess what? Oh, they also have a lot of sexism. How surprising. And racism. Let's just try to let go of all that. And I think I don't know exactly how it happened, but I'm sort of proud that I can be kind of a bridge between those spaces. And I know how to talk to Christians who are actually willing to listen and say, if you want to work with atheists toward the common good, toward combating abuse, or toward certain political issues, here are things to avoid, that might make them feel like you're expressing Christian supremacism or overstepping their autonomy. And then I can go to the atheist organizations and say, look, here's why we really need to be working with religious communities that share our values, including Christians, and here are things we can maybe stop trying to do or say so we're not needlessly alienating them. It's
Right.
something that I try to do.
That's really beautiful. Hey, this is Ashley Easter, and I'm interrupting this interview to tell you something really exciting that Courage 365 is now offering for our community. One of our values at Courage 365 is to help survivors live with courage every day. And one way we're doing that is by sending out morning inspirational texts written by survivors for survivors in the Courage 365 community. All you have to do is text the word courage to the number on the screen, and you'll be automatically added to the list. We talk a lot about cults here and a lot of people who've survived cults, and I think that's like the anti-cult way, is to be inclusive instead of exclusive. And I think working towards that almost helps guard against the authoritarian structures and just seeing
I was
everybody.
trying to navigate the tensions of some tents are too big, but
Sure. No,
a lot of tents, but many tents can be bigger.
Right, because there is definitely a strong argument for not including, like, we would never have somebody that we knew was an abuser on our show. Like, that is a line that we won't cross. But we would love to have people of different perspectives and different experiences and different faiths, and I think that's a beautiful thing. I think you really hit on something powerful when you talked about like the shared values and looking for the humanity in everyone. And I had when you mentioned the coalition for religious coalition
for
reproductive choice.
choice.
Okay, yeah. Do you know Reverend Katie Zay? She's on.
Katie Zay.
I think
I don't.
she's on the board. She may be, I don't know, chair or something like that. I don't remember what
Okay, I
her
don't.
roles have switched.
Okay, I
But
don't believe she and I have met.
okay,
In the national organization, the main person I've worked with is Carrie Jackson,
okay,
and I've also worked with the wonderful women of the Indiana branch,
okay.
where I'm originally from.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Because Reverend Katie Zay, she was the one who actually gave me my certificate when I was ordained. So that was pretty cool.
Oh,
But she
oh,
works the same
that's great.
organization. So just
Hmm.
again, another way that like paths cross and we, are interconnected for common justice goals. Um, okay, so I have about 2 questions left, and one of them is what are some of the myths and misconceptions that people have about those who leave evangelicalism in particular? I'm sure you've run across a lot of those, and I'm wondering if maybe there's 3 myths that you see that are just like really common threads.
Hmm. Well, I think I often think about this question through the lens of media analysis and media
Mm,
criticism, because the media, well, in trying to work to build up exvangelical visibility, one of the arguments that I've been consistently making for years now is that people who grew up in this subculture and have left it have a unique perspective, and it's one that it's worth uh, giving a hearing in our society. And to me, this is part. It's certainly connected to also wanting there to be a real space for secular voices in in our national conversation in the public sphere. I think secular voices are usually siloed. It is sometimes partly our own fault of secular people for needlessly alienating people of faith. Um, but obviously, those are not exactly the same thing. Um, I think that a lot of people think that people who have left these communities are not worth listening to, that we just have an axe to grind, that our stories are not typical, that they represent the fringe or the extreme, and that we're painting with too broad a brush when we're talking about patterns. We tend to be dismissed, um, not really given a seat at the table. And so, and yet I just saw there's yet another, terrible article whitewashing evangelicals that's going to appear in the June issue of the Atlantic, um, in the print magazine, and I think it's already up on the internet. But in any case, there's this notion that you need to listen to these people who are still evangelicals who are telling you that, oh, it's all just the culture became too politicized and it's not like it didn't used to be that way. And they listen to people who are more defensive and who are still not going to challenge basically the Christian hegemony, cultural hegemony, and Christian supremacism that pervades our discourse and that is usually unremarked. Whereas, I'm not going to say don't talk to that alienated pastor who's sad about all the pastors going QAnon or the people who won't go to churches where the pastors aren't. Like, okay, that's a perspective, fine. But to say that, to uphold that perspective as really the only one that matters, you can only talk to people who are still insiders somehow, never to former insiders. It's this very weird thing that journalists do that doesn't strike me as fair journalism or in line with basic journalistic values and principles at all.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
I
No,
don't know if I really answered your question as you asked
you
it, but that's.
did. You did. No, I think you may have given a couple additional myths versus just 3, which is actually great because there are so many myths about people leaving evangelicalism and
Oh yeah, the myths from evangelicals themselves are so funny. They just want to have all the sex, you know, or deconstruction is cool now. It's a buzzword, right? It's what all the kids are doing.
Yes. No,
Those are funny ones too, but I care more about, the ones that you kind of see in the mainstream media
right.
that are often more implicit than even explicitly stated.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, you covered a lot of them, and I think a lot of people who are leaving or have left or considering leaving recognize those things, or those are fears of what they feel people are going to say to them. And so kind of like one of our last questions, I would just like to ask you, well, number one, I know it's important to you to have exvangelical voices uplifted, but what would you say to someone who is maybe leaving, considering leaving, and maybe they're feeling inside that they need to start speaking up about their experiences or speaking up about things, patterns that they're seeing, but they're fearful. Can you talk to them about why exvangelical voices are important and why they um, really should feel, confident that there's people who do support them if they decide to speak up?
Mhm. One of the reasons that I've wanted to work to create more visibility, more of at least a sort of loose cultural exvangelical movement, is so that people do know that it's okay to leave and come out on the other side. And they do know that, oh, they're not the only one who ever, got really traumatized by Thief in the Night and A Distant Thunder, or for later generations, Left Behind,
Right,
or
right.
that, they're not the only one who would cry sometimes in bed at night as a 5 or 6 year old kid praying the sinner's prayer over and over and over again, because what if you didn't do it right last time? But these are actually pretty common stories. There's something kind of validating about that. Maybe I wouldn't go so far as saying empowering, but maybe it is also empowering in at least the sense that now you know that, okay, this wasn't just me, and this wasn't just a quirk. I think both the general public need to know about these patterns, and people who are, harmed by these patterns and really feeling that and thinking about it need to know it's not just them, it's not just their particular family or church or community, um, and then they can decide to do with that what they will. So yeah, I want these conversations to be had in public for both of those sorts of reasons, to hopefully kind of shift the national conversation eventually. And I would also argue that within our particular kind of white supremacism and patriarchy that are still normalized to a large extent in American society, Christian supremacism is also part of that. White privilege, male privilege are things. Christian privilege is also a thing. Of course, Christian privilege is not distributed evenly, and this is what complicates it a bit, because you've got to think about it in terms of all the other intersections, right? So um, African American churches sometimes still get bombed, for example, or vandalized, just like a mosque or a synagogue might be. So obviously, African American Christians are not experiencing Christian privilege in the same way that white Christians are. Similarly, it's not so true today, really, but for much of American history, Catholics were kind of second-class Christians, right? And I guess it's not really. I mean, look, they dominate the Supreme Court now, so it's it's not like it used to be, but it's still a historical factor that maybe merits some consideration, right? I mean, when we talk about WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, I think a lot of people just take the Protestant part for granted, don't even think about it. But it's there. It has been there. It's still there. Christian supremacism, Christian privilege, they are a thing in American society. I want people to understand that this is all interlocking, and you can't really attack. I mean, obviously you choose where to focus your advocacy on, but if we're going to dismantle these oppressive structures, we have to dismantle white supremacy, patriarchy, and Christian supremacy, so that pluralism is normalized in our society. Um, and I sort of got sidetracked on one of my little soapboxes there.
I love your
But
soapboxes. That's why I brought you on the show.
thanks,
Oh,
Ashley. But yeah, and the other reason, of course, is that I want individuals to know that they're not alone, and then yeah, community, connecting with others who get it. For me, that was just a very validating thing, and it happened for many people. It's not a replacement for therapy, though. People need to understand that and to watch out for trauma bonding and that sort of thing. But still, just to know you can leave. That's the first step, and I think people also need to be told that, um, and it's okay to just let go of the certainty, and you don't have to leave Jesus if you like him. You sort this out for yourself, and you land where you land. Um, if you're still some kind of Christian after sorting through everything, that's okay. If you're not, that's okay. But don't be afraid to just embark on that process. And then how much you talk about it and when you talk about it, I mean, that really depends on you and where and in what context. A lot of people only talk about this stuff in like closed Facebook groups or with a close circle of friends or anonymously online. Some people are not ready to tell their stories. Some people may never be, and that's okay. If you are, able to publicly share your story, I think that helps. And so I want to encourage people who maybe have some more privilege or have gone through some more processing by this point to talk, because the conversations need to happen. But if you can't do that, there's, you're still valid and you deserve love and respect, and just go at your own pace and take care of yourself. And, you can consume the culture around these conversations now without having to be a public figure in them. And hopefully it helps you somehow.
That's really beautiful. Yeah. And I'm hearing themes of like, you're not alone. And I think that really is a theme that a lot of survivors, it's just healing to hear that. And encouraging people to heal and process at their own pace. And yeah, just so helpful, so helpful. Thank you for that. I wanted
Hopefully,
to ask,
the more that we are visible, the more people will feel like they can do that. And so I'm hoping that some people, younger people today, are not going to feel like it takes them a decade and a half to stop being afraid of hell from the time that they actually stopped intellectually believing in it.
right.
I'm hoping that it kind of snowballs that way. But people, yeah.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Yes, I know so many people are resonating with this right now, so listening. Chrissy, what is one piece of advice that you've received that has just really stuck with you? Maybe one of your favorite pieces of advice that you could share with us today?
I don't even really. So this isn't exactly a piece of advice, but I think I sort of took it as advice. So when I took art classes in middle school, it was a thing that I did as an extracurricular activity outside of school that my parents let me do. One of my teachers told me that he really appreciated that I was teachable, that I didn't already come in thinking that I knew everything, and that I was going to be resistant to the teacher who had mastered these techniques that I was trying to learn, and who definitely was someone who was far more experienced and knowledgeable and advanced than I was in the area. And I think I took that to heart, and it's been something that became sort of a mantra to me, is that try to recognize, to the extent that you can, when you don't know something. Try to be aware of the limits of your knowledge. Obviously, you don't know what you don't know, but if you can sort of know, that you don't know something, then you can remain teachable if it's something important for you to learn. And that applies in a lot of social situations, not just in formally educational situations, right? It doesn't just apply in school or apprenticeships or internships, but in relationships that you have with people who are different from you as well. Be open, be teachable, don't be dogmatic, and don't think you know everything. That's what I took away from that. And I was like 13 years old. And I think I refined my understanding of it over time. Yeah. But, he wasn't really giving it to me as advice so much as something that he observed about me. But I was like, oh, well, I guess that's a good idea. I'll try to just do that consistently.
Yeah. That is such great advice. And I think I've heard someone say something to the effect of like, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And I think, it's just always, I believe that the universe is always expanding. So information is always expanding. We never can get to the bottom of everything that we could learn, or ways we could grow, or ways we could heal. And so, constantly realizing that, yes, we can trust ourselves and our intuition to an extent, but there's also this beautiful thing when we interact with other people, and we have so much to learn. So thank you for that. Where can everybody find your work?
Thanks, Ashley. You can find me on Twitter at C_Stroop. I'm not as active on there all the time now as I used to be. I've learned that I need to take some breaks some more, but still pretty active on Twitter. And I have a website, cstroop.com. It hasn't been updated in a while. There is an annotated list of resources there that some people may find useful. Some of them may be outdated. But I also have made some sort of infographics that distill some of my thinking about things like pluralism and citizenship and proselytizing, which my thinking on that is basically don't do it. But if you want to see these infographics, they're on that website as well. My writing can be found in the various outlets, but Religion Dispatches and Open Democracy I write for very consistently, so you can find my work there.
I love it so much. Everybody, definitely check out Chrissy's work. You are going to want to download those infographics. I've seen them. I believe you brought the one about not proselytizing to the Courage Conference, and people were
Yeah.
very impressed by it. Very, very useful.
My anti-tracts.
Yes, yes. Oh my gosh. Well, hey, it was such a joy talking with you today. Thank you for coming on the show, and really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Ashley. Really appreciate the invitation. It's always great to connect with you. It's always just such an uplifting experience.
Well, I feel the same way about you. All right, everybody. Well, definitely search out Chrissy Stroop's social media and websites, but also follow us on our social media for Courage 365. So you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We're also on Twitter. Not quite as active there, but also on Twitter. We stream these shows every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern. We also have a huge backlog of episodes, just a full library of the previous seasons. We're on season 3 right now, and so you can binge watch season 1 and 2 from our website or YouTube channel. And if you hop on over to our website, which is courage365.org, you can download this free ebook. It's called 5 Keys to Living a Life of Courage. This is totally free for you. It is all about taking your next most courageous steps as a survivor. And if you're in a situation where you need help, of course, contact your local authorities if that is safe to do. But we also have a need help page on our website with a list of hotlines, different resources that you can connect with. We have other varieties of things. We have a text message list that you can join to have supportive texts sent to you every morning, written by survivors for survivors. We have of course, this show shows up every week, but we've also started something new called Courage Clubs. If you haven't signed up for that, I'd encourage you to go ahead and do it. Again, you can find that on our website. It's courage365.org/clubs. And this is our peer support groups, online peer support groups that are facilitated. And we would love, love, love to have you join us for that. Well, everybody, thank you so much for watching, and live with courage.